Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for being here today. We are very grateful that you're here to talk to us and, about Latin American and Latinx fashion. We will present to you the work that we've been doing for almost 2 years now, from the moment when we started discussing this exhibition with our director, Valerie Steele, and deputy director, Patricia Mears, to now. And we still have a few months ahead of us to curate this exhibition, and so your feedback is really appreciated today.
And so we hope that in addition to listening to the great lineup of speakers that we've set up for today, you'll reflect and think, come up with your own questions, thoughts, opinions that you can share with us, because it's really going to help inform the rest of our curatorial process. And Tanya and I are both part of the education department, so visitor engagement is really important to us, and we want to make sure that we are reaching the widest audience possible.
So when we started thinking about this exhibition and the book that will come out next year, and even this symposium, there were a ton of questions that popped up in our heads. And so here we just made a selection of all the lines of inquiry that came up throughout research, thinking about what are the multiple considerations that we needed to keep in mind to curate an exhibition of this nature.
And as you can see, these questions range from very practical things like what do we have in our museum collection, to more theoretical questions like how do we self-identify. And what the funny thing was that as we were kind of going through these questions at the beginning process, when we were putting our proposal together, one question just led to another question, another question, another question. And so as Tanya said, we're going to kind of go through some of those, but again, we'll be interested in hearing your feedback about some of those ideas as well.
So this talk is in the format of, these are some of the questions that we started asking ourselves and continue to ask ourselves in our curatorial process. So starting with, I guess, the most basic question, what is Latin American fashion? And this is part of an even bigger question, which is what is Latin America? And I just came back from a trip to Colombia where there was a forum of fashion scholars from 54 different schools throughout Latin America. And the opening remarks were by the organizer who said, you know, there is not a single Latin America. There are many Latin Americas. We are very diverse. We speak many languages. We all look very different. We have very different ethnic and racial makeups.
And so really where we started was we asked ourselves, what is Latin America? We went to the Google machine and we typed it in. And we started reading various definitions until we came to one that we felt comfortable with, which we're putting on the screen here. And we like this definition because we felt it spoke to the broad geographic areas, but also to the diversity of languages and culture that make up Latin America, make up the region.
Mm-hmm. And so we were thinking, okay, Latin America is about geography. It is a lot about language, right? Romance languages, Spanish, Portuguese, French. And it also is about the shared colonial past. And so we all have experienced colonialism one way or another. And so we think that all of these factors really come into play when we look at fashion from the region.
So the next big question was, why do a show in Latin America? And so there was a multitude of answers that we suggested there. From this sort of US perspective, in the past 20 years, and if we didn't already mention, this exhibition is going to focus mainly on contemporary fashion from the past 20 years. But over the past 20 years, there's been great emphasis on designers who have been historically overlooked in fashion. And two great examples of that are on the screen here. The first would be when Michelle Obama wore a dress by the Cuban-American designer Isabel Toledo to the 2009 inauguration. And until this point, Isabel Toledo was kind of known as a designer's designer, right? She was not a household name by any means. And then all of a sudden, her name was being broadcast, around the world. And so that was a great moment of visibility for her. And from there, we look at even other figures, such as the pop culture singer Bad Bunny, who in the picture on screen here was dressed by the Mexican designer Roberto Sanchez. And so what you see is this fact that he's choosing or to be dressed by designers of Latin American heritage.
And we, as we were meditating why do this exhibition, we thought that one theme that seems to be ongoing when we look at the histories of fashion is the invisibility of Latin American fashion, or the invisibility of designers of Latin American heritage, in the sense that we have names that have been very important historically of designers who come from Latin America, and yet there seems to be this perception that there's no fashion coming from the region, or that Latin American fashion is a very recent phenomenon. And here, when we talk about Latin America, we're also including its diaspora. So we're thinking of the Latinx designers who, when we mention the word Latinx, we're referring to people who work and or live in the United States who are of Latin American heritage. And on and on, we can see in fashion press, for example, that there is like, oh my God, there's like, Latin America is coming to the fore, and that seems to be the sentence that you read like every 3 years in press, as if Latin America were only emerging now. And this is a little bit of what we want to address, and we want to showcase there's the immense talent that exists in the region, that is very influential globally, and that we sometimes just have to put together to see that there's so many creators, but also members of the industry, journalists, behind the scenes makers, makeup artists, who we all are contributing to fashion culture and have a shared heritage.
One of the other factors that kind of informed the direction that we're planning on taking the exhibition is looking at what has been done before. And there have been a few exhibitions that have looked at Latin American fashion design. One of them actually took place here at the museum at MFIT back in 2002. However, this exhibition was looking Latin American fashion on the New York runway. And so while it was looking at sort of a wide range of talent, its scope was very small and focused. Other fashion exhibitions have focused on one single designer, so they've been retrospectives. And while they've looked at the evolution of a career, again, they weren't looking at this group of talent as a whole.
And the third example that we have here is another type of exhibition that has been happening, especially recently, which looks at design emerging from Latin America, and sometimes it includes fashion, and sometimes it also includes art. But what we noticed is that there's a need for an exhibition that will focus on fashion only. And so what we're doing is we are looking at fashion designers from the last 20 years, from the 21st century, which also seems to, like the exhibition at the museum at FIT is 20 years ago. Surprisingly, it doesn't sound like that, but it's been 20 years since we addressed this topic on a regional level, so to speak. And so we felt that that was something that was needed, and that's how we started pivoting in that direction.
And so all these considerations taken together allowed us to narrow down the scope of the exhibition to the sort of three ideas, the parameters that you see on the screen. As Tanya just mentioned, the first is to focus on designers of the past 20 years. And adding to that, the reason is also just to show the rich fashion culture that is coming out of Latin America and the United States. The second kind of parameter was looking at some of the socio-historical influences and cultural dynamics that make Latin American fashion so diverse. And I think part of the conversation around Latin American fashion, especially in the United States, tends to homogenize what Latin American fashion is, right? It's colorful, it's bright colors, it's ruffles, and that's so far from the truth. And so we're taking this approach to kind of shed light and help bring the focus wider.
And when we start thinking about this, there is the possibility of doing an exhibition in geographical terms. So cluster designers by country. There's also the possibility of doing a chronological survey, right? But we felt that, in a sense, didn't do justice to the work that's coming out of the region. Instead, we decided to do it thematically because we saw that there were different designers from very faraway lands. The Americas is a very extensive territory. You have so many cultures, so many ways of understanding the world, and within each country, there's different viewpoints from designer to designer. And so since we were moving away from the concept of a single Latin American style and moving into a variety of voices, we thought that themes served this purpose better. There seemed to be certain themes that came up over and over from the different countries, and the designers that we were beginning to research in more depth, and so it seemed that themes worked better for this type of exhibition.
And themes also allow us to show sort of the rich layered work that designers are doing. So it shows their diversity, but by linking them by themes, it also shows kind of commonalities and things that are in common.
Oh, sorry, wrong button.
So the next big question is, what did we have in our museum collection? Because this show is going to take place in the museum's Fashion and Textile History Gallery. And the mandate for that gallery is that all the objects or garments that we show must belong to the museum's permanent collection. So we set out to kind of investigate and see how many Latin American and Latinx designers we have. And we were surprised by the amount. It was more than we thought it was going to be. However, what we did, we had designers like Oscar de la Renta and Carolina Herrera, Alexander Herchkovich, who's a Brazilian designer, or Pat Bow, but we didn't have a very huge scope of designers. And so something that we are going to be doing is acquiring new pieces that can help build the collection, help build our Latin American holdings.
And so here's a small sample of new acquisitions that we've done recently in preparation for this exhibition. So here you see certain names that were already in the collection, like Maria Cornejo and Rick Owens, but we also, our first acquisition of Gabriela Hearst was this sweater that she did to fundraise for Planned Parenthood, but also the one that awarded her the Walmart Prize, which was the first prize that she ever got. Or the work of Brenda Ekiwa, who did this inspired by blankets from Mexico called Colchas San Marcos.
And we're focusing also on contemporary designers who have some sort of international or regional presence. That was another kind of parameter that we set for ourselves because there's a wide pool to choose from.
And here we want to bring to the fore some of the issues that we felt is necessary to address, that we want to address, and many of these topics are going to be discussed today at more length. So ethnicity and race, because again, we are talking about a very vast region. Different countries, for example, have different understandings of ethnicity and race, right? Indigeneity, for example, might be considered ethnicity in some countries. It might be considered a race in others. And so if you consider matters of race and ethnicity differently, that has to be teased for this kind of exhibition because, of course, we are very diverse in this respect as well as in language and culturally.
Also keeping in mind the sort of unequal dynamics between the global North, global South relations, and how that historically has tended to make sort of the global North look at the South as unsophisticated or underdeveloped, which is of course not the case. And so the other kind of tendency that comes in, especially with fashion, as I mentioned before, is to assume that there's also just this one Latin American style. And so that led us to take more of a decentering approach to this exhibition.
So when we talk about decentering, what we mean is that fashion is polycentric. There's not one single center of fashion, but it emerges from different places. And we had to be particularly conscious of this because we're a museum that's based in the global North, in a city that's considered a fashion center. And we were addressing fashion production from countries in the global South. And so we are not the one and only authority here. This is an exhibition that we're building with our audiences, with our colleagues and scholars. And so very consciously, when we, for example, started working on the book that's going to accompany the exhibition, we wanted to invite voices from different countries who have different research backgrounds, who look at fashion from different places. And today at the symposium, we also have makers, we have curators, we have scholars. So that's the idea here, is that we're not the authorities. There's many people who bring many knowledges to the conversation. And so we want our curatorial process to involve all these different voices.
And lastly, that we're a museum located in New York City, which, as Tanya mentioned, is a fashion center, but which also has a really large Latin American heritage diaspora population. And so what we want to make sure we're doing is reaching our Latinx community as well. How do we want to see our stories told? What interests and how do you want to be represented? And so later today, we're going to hear from two designers, Brenda Ikiwa and Willy Chavarria. And it's kind of part of why it's so important to include designers like these, because they are literally sort of taking a Latinx aesthetic, Latinx stories, and weaving them into the fabric of American fashion.
And so part of our incorporating diverse voices was starting from home. So we, with our colleague Frida Loyola, worked on a research project at MFIT, where we did a survey of our Latin American and Latinx community, where we asked how they self-identified and a few other questions related to self-identification. That then was followed by focus groups where we were asking the members of our community what they would like to see in an exhibition about Latin American fashion and Latinx fashion. And so here we have one of the many questions that we asked. And we were really intrigued by the fact that if you look at the percentages, we have 19.44 yes into almost every category. So everybody self-identifies almost equally if you say, are you Hispanic, are you Latinx, are you Latino, Latina? Do you, all of the above, it doesn't make a difference to me. And so that led us to decide, and this will be a topic for a larger conversation with Aida and Willy Chavarria later today about Are We Latinx? But we thought that we wanted to use the term Latinx because it is a more inclusive term. It is gender neutral, but it also acknowledges blackness and indigeneity. And we think that we align with those ideas. And so that's why we're choosing the word Latinx.
Other ways that we're reaching out to community to get different voices and opinions or perspectives is we also formed an advisory committee. The advisory committee is there to get wider community feedback. We have consulted with a bunch of experts, whether they are fashion professionals, designers, academics, PR employees, but they are there to help also guide. We meet with them. We've had one meeting so far. We'll have at least two more. And they're there to help sort of guide and advise our process and maybe also point out things that we might be overlooking.
And they have already been helping us open doors with certain designers. We're actually really grateful to them. But so one was an audience, audience-directed initiative. This is about meeting our colleagues in the industry. So if you look at the list, there basically are no designers. These are other practitioners in fashion in an exhibition about fashion design. And finally, today is also a moment when we want to hear from the community what your opinions are. And so the last session, which is the Q&A, is really important to us because that is the opportunity when we also have to enter into dialogue with our audience members. You are here because this topic interests you, so we really want to hear from you.
And so at present, as we mentioned, the exhibition is organized thematically. And these are some of the themes that we have at present, although they are somewhat still in flux. And we're just going to go through them really quickly with you because we're running out of time. But each theme that we have listed here will pertain to a talk that you're going to hear during the day today. So we're looking at popular culture, Latin American elegance. We're looking at themes such as sustainability and Indigenous heritage, which, a side note here, sustainability, as we've been researching, sustainability and Indigenous heritage are kind of very porous themes. They bleed into one another. And that's something that has been really enlightening that we've been finding as we've been curating this show, is in dividing things out thematically. How quickly art becomes politics, sustainability is Indigenous heritage, or gender is elegance. And so we have a great lineup of speakers today who will, as I mentioned, be addressing all of these topics. So we hope that you enjoy this day of guests that we have and speakers. And we really do look forward to the feedback that you will have for us. This is the first time we're doing a symposium before the exhibition opens. And so your comments and ideas are super important.
So thank you very much for being with us today, and we hope it's a very insightful day from now until 5 p.m. Thank you.